That's supposed to be a glass and the... Number one, we are stuck with the small cups of tea. I have a massive cup at home, which I spent 5 minutes searching Amazon for. It's this big. And so I will be going out regularly for this to be filled. So, but also feel free to go out as often as you need for tea. The tea and coffee are going to be here for the entire morning. Welcome to our session. So essentially, as you all know, because we sent you out the pre-event pack, you are present for our event on researching easily ignored groups. And what we just want to emphasize is that we just chose 2 different examples, but there are a range of different examples of easily ignored groups within research. But that's because we found that we had expertise within the university and outside the university in these 2 areas. So that's why we chose these areas. Across the range of other events that we will be hosting, we will touch on other areas as well. So the 2 different examples that we're looking at today are Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities and neurodiverse communities. But to start off, I also need to tell you a bit about the EDI Research Center. So this is a collaboration between the EDI Research Center, the Administrative Fairness Lab, represented by Jed, and Involve at York, represented by Hannah, and her 3 other colleagues, whose names I cannot see right now, but I'm bad with names generally, but I will never forget your face. So if we see each other in Sainsbury's, I'm like, hey girl! But you'll notice I still never mention your name throughout the entire conversation. So essentially across the EDI Research Center, we're running a series of networking and seminar events across this semester. Last semester we worked on an EDI research framework, and the networking and seminar events are based on that framework. Because the framework took most of our sanity. The other person here is Sylvia, who is the project manager. So when I say I'm referring to her and myself. It took most of our sanity in terms of the fact that we had to spend... Let's come on in and say. We had to spend a great deal of time we wanted it to be a summary of where the University of York stands in terms of EDI within its research, and we found that we had a great deal of strengths. Number one, we had a lot of people within the university who were doing amazing work in these areas, and we kind of pestered them until they decided to say yes to us and become part of our EDI advisory board. So within the EDI Research Center, if you want to perform a research in an area that you're not too familiar with, or you have a question in terms of your research, we have a range of experts who have signed up for our advisory board, and you can submit a question through our form that's available on our website. The advisory board also helped us to develop the EDI research framework, which is just an outline of where the University of York stands. It highlights our strengths, and it also highlights kind of areas in which we still have to develop in order to become a leader in this area. We're trying to leave a legacy of having done some work towards developing this, because EDI is something that we're all very, very passionate about. And so the first thing that we did was to have the EDI Research Fund, which is closed off now, but we've successfully funded 2 projects, one looking at the master's experience of international students, and the second one looking at how to develop a framework when you want to engage disabled students in research. We also are performing a range of seminars and networking events, as I said. We've had our pedagogical research and subtle one already, because these are the 4 themes of what we're focusing on. Within that one, we also had a small pot of funding that people can apply for, and we funded a small project that is looking at how students engage in feedback. Because for those of us in the room who are lecturers, we know we spend a lot of time telling them how they can improve, and they don't read it. and so we're trying to see what are the predictors of them reading it and how we can make that a more engaging experience. We've this was the second of our inclusive research methods and methodologies events. We held one last month where we looked at homelessness, research with visually impaired persons, etc. So we're looking at different populations across. What's coming up is our decolonizing research one, where we're working with IGDC, so International and Global Development Research Center, and they have a launch paper, so we're supporting them in kind of advertising that launch paper, and then we're going to have practical sessions on how you can put the recommendations of the launch paper into practice in your own research, and we're doing that across the different faculties, and then we're ending off with dismantling systemic inequities from within research. So keep updated. To keep updated, you can sign up to our research network. Finally, We're going to have an EDI research conference in June across the 4 themes that we're focusing on. So if you do have any projects that you'd be interested in having displayed there, then let us know. We're working on this alongside Kira and Trahan, who has this amazing picture of how it all is going to work. So I am just the person who's going to be like, okay, how do we get that done? And so I don't quite know how it's going to look like yet, but we're going to have a range of different, it's going to be a way to display the work that we're doing as an EDI within the university. So if you are performing research in this area, then please let us know if you'll be interested in presenting anything. And so this is kind of, we're trying with the social media, but at about 3 years ago, I realized I'm too old for social media, so it's too much. It's like every single day you have to keep people updated on different things, and everybody's posting about their breakfast, and I'm just like, I don't get how this became a thing to post about your food. Aren't you hungry? Don't you want to eat? And so I am not on social media, but we have to. So we post like once every 3 months when we remember, but we're trying. So please do add us, and please follow us if you are interested in keeping updated. And without further ado, we will get started. So our first person to present today is Sangeeta, right? Okay. I could do this. Do you? One second. I think Jeff should introduce you, isn't it?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation today, and that's such a warm welcome. And I'm sure that's we've all finding that very stimulating to think about some of the issues related to fairness and equity, and how to develop research that will be using equitable methods. Now, I have to there's a bit of a health warning that I think the basic premise of what I want to share today is that there's no blueprint for doing it. So all that I would like to do is just provoke some ideas and persuade us to really think a little bit more critically about how we are really actually defining who the problem is and what are the kinds of solutions we might be posing to solve that problem that we seem to have posed in relation to research that we're doing. So I'm going to be speaking about researching easily ignored groups today, and provide some examples from the research that we've been involved in sociology, across law, but also the School of Medicine, which is very interdisciplinary, looking at some of the issues that are very salient within the local Gypsy, Roma traveller communities in York. And we recently also got funded by the Yorkshire Cancer Research to look at outcomes for cancer within these communities across. So I might use some of those examples from the research that we're doing currently.
It only works with the mouse for some reason.
With the mouse? I've forgotten how to use the mouse. Oh, how do you do that? Yeah, okay. So as I said, I think I just want to more provoke a discussion rather than provide some kind of a framework that will really be able to address some of the issues that we might be talking today throughout the course of the rest of the 2 sessions we have. So the first is to really think a little bit more critically and a little bit more reflectively about the concepts and the language we use, and then move on to speaking a little bit more about the methodologies that we might use to address the issues related to easily ignored groups, and then to move on to talking a little bit more about some of the pitfalls in the methodologies that we think are actually, the gold standard for, we've got the buzzword now. It's all about EDI, and so far as we tick all the boxes, somehow magically we will address the problems that we are trying to resolve. So it is very important for all of us as researchers to really keep our mind very focused on what do we want to achieve. So usually we think of the research questions, we think of the research methodology, and nowadays all of us have to think about impact and the outcomes. And again, I think as all of us, I'm sure, are aware of the fact that impact and outcomes also seems to have really become another kind of a box that we really need to preempt and think even before we stepped in there. So if I knew what the impact, I might know what the outputs might be, that's aspirational, but if I knew what the impact is really going to be and I could measure that and tell you how I'm going to measure that, then possibly doing the research wasn't necessary at all. But there is a kind of a very dialectical relationship in terms of where we find the money, how we define the questions, the methods we use, and the probable impact that research might have, which is not to deny that we can't have impact, but it's a question of thinking more critically about what do we really want to achieve at the end of that. And it's not necessary that each piece of research really needs to have the similar kinds of goals, but just to think a little bit more critically about the relationship between all these different bits that go into a piece of research. And why is it important to keep an eye on the outcomes, especially within the context of so-called under-researched, hard to reach, and I'm using all these within quotes because I think these are all very problematic categories and concepts, and we'll go on to speak a little bit more about that. So in terms of the concepts and the language, I have to share, can I, with Jed's, with Jed's permission, when I had the invitation first, I think it was loosely structured as Gypsy, Roma, traveler communities and neurodiverse communities, and my first thought was, what on the earth are we trying to sort of do here in terms of combining these two sets of concepts together? And I found that very unsettling. And I did have a word with Jed, and Jed that explained that these are two sessions, and it's just the way it was worded. But sometimes we do take our own concepts and language very much for granted. And I think that's the first step towards any piece of good research and any piece of good methodology, is to start really from the scratch. So the first question I want to pose today is, who defines or identifies easily ignored groups? Why do we think certain groups are easily ignored? Which might be a historical question, which might be an empirical question, but also then how do we perceive these ignored groups? So do we see them as usually within the context of the work that I do? I have a long-standing interest in health inequalities in relation to intersections of, say, race, ethnicity, and gender or socioeconomic position. So I might identify groups that are socioeconomically more deprived than some of the others, but my interest in the current work is to look at, for example, the Gypsy, Roma, traveler communities in terms of are they, a white minority within a white majority? Are they being perceived as a very racialized group, which is what the literature suggests? So the question is, and lots of healthcare practitioners define them as hard to reach. So the literature also suggests that some of these groups by default tend to be sitting at the margins of delivery of services or delivery of educational interventions, delivery of healthcare, because somebody has decided, or people think or perceive these communities to be hard to reach. They're very difficult. They're culturally very different. They speak a different language, and it is really difficult to really communicate with them. So communication, as we know, is a two-way process. It's not just a one-way process. And then finally, the third bit of that question should be, who decides on the issues that need to be researched within these hard-to-reach communities? So how did we decide, for example, that cancer is more important than diabetes or something else? And then, of course, to look at the goals of the goals of the research and the outcomes of the research. So I'm going to sort of use the example of the current research, looking very specifically on. So I've forgotten how to use the mouse now. I just did it. Is it? Oh, just. All right, thank you. So just one click. Right, okay, thanks. Yeah. So if we're talking again, coming back to the main issue of wanting to use more inclusive methods, after having maybe first done a little bit of soul searching in terms of how we select this community and why we think that particular group or community is a hard to reach group, then we really need to be, and we've decided whether it's cancer or whether it's uptake of, say, COVID vaccine is the other piece of research we have done with the local communities here. Then it's a question of, we've already decided today that we want to be really using more inclusive methods. So how do we identify factors? First, underpinning exclusions should be the main question I think we need to. So if we once decided why these communities are either hard to reach, under-researched, or ignored or neglected, then we have to have a sense of, what their social world really is like in relation to whatever the issue or the problem we are trying to address. In our case, it's access to healthcare services or cancer services. Then we also need to have a very good understanding which comes from the literature, which comes from the history of these communities and the literature that might be related to your own particular discipline, about identifying really the factors that really underpin exclusion. By which I really mean is that no problem at a point of time, irrespective of poor health outcomes we know for cancer, for example, the outcomes are very poor because people from Gypsy, Roma, traveler communities seem to either possibly identify signs and symptoms of cancers a bit later than usual, other, if you like, majority groups in York, but also maybe they have certain preconceptions about how they might be not dealt with properly or in a friendly manner by the healthcare practitioners, so they might avoid going and seeing the healthcare practitioners. There's also some talk about there being certain taboos related to cancer, so there are cultural taboos related to certain health conditions that might be associated with death and dying, due to which people sometimes think that, this is only something that's going to settle down. But also we've also seen that if in communities, particularly where rates of socioeconomic deprivation are very high in lots of inner city areas, across the board, irrespective of the ethnicity or the other backgrounds of a particular community, what also happens is that people's everyday lives might be so difficult. So, for example, if I'm living on a caravan site and I've got a leaking roof and a sick child, then if I'm having even aches and pains, I will try and ignore these because all the everyday conditions that are very difficult to deal with in practical, everyday life per se, and the vulnerability related to insecure, say, employment or housing, or other issues might take over, and health tends to then become at the bottom of the pile of those priorities for people who are struggling in their everyday life. So that is to talk about more the structural issues, the socioeconomic background of the communities, and no community really is a homogeneous whole. I think that's what we really need to keep our focus on, irrespective of whether we are looking at the Gypsies, travelers, Romas, or people of Black African Caribbean origin, or people who might have migrated from East Europe, having fled war. No community really is a homogeneous whole. I think there are sometimes perceptions that communities have of themselves as being, we're all together in it and we're all similar. But actually, like any other community, the Gypsies, Roma, traveler communities come from very different backgrounds, might have moved from X number of places across the UK or from outside UK, Ireland, Scotland, and there are these differences that will play out in relation to each other if you're, speaking to them as a group. But in relation to the outside world, they might present the self-image of being a very cohesive community. So in many ways, I think everyday lives, as an anthropologist, I would say, are pretty much similar, and the divisions within any communities are along very similar lines. That could be gender, that could be socioeconomic position, that could be the level of education one has had, and the circumstances of their everyday lives, where they're living, the neighborhoods, etc. So these divisions also very important to consider in terms of having a more nuanced, if you like, understanding of who we are thinking of as the group. Because just as communities have an imaginary ideal of who we are, like the Gypsy Roma traveler communities, they all say, this is our culture and we don't do A, B, C, D, E. So I've been in focus groups where people would say, actually, we don't really talk about the C word, the big disease or the bad disease, because there is an assumption within our culture that anything that is associated with death, you basically don't speak about that because that's almost like you're bringing it upon yourselves. So that's a notion that lots of other communities might have. But in one-to-one interviews, it seemed like people were more easy to talk about the experience that they might specifically have had about cancer, and then they would talk about, for example, during COVID, there was this one gentleman who was living across 3 households because he had split up with his first wife and he was managing 2 households, and then he was also providing extra care to his ex-mother-in-law who was suffering from terminal cancer because the service providers actually could not get to her due to X number of reasons. So these are some of the differences and the nuances. If we are aware of those nuances, then we can moderate our methods accordingly to really think about how, for example, in this particular case, what do we really be looking at, the factors that can then lead us to look at some of the methodologies to really unpick some of these complex intersections between their socioeconomic position, but also their historical background. Why is it that we found that there's a lack of trust, for example, between people from these communities and healthcare practitioners, but also in relation to their access to education and other factors that are very closely related as part of their everyday lives? And we hear the similar stories in families over and over again that the health outcomes really have not, we know what the problems are, but why is it that for the last donkey's years, 5 decades or more, the mortality rates and the infant mortality rates in these communities are much, much higher? So on average, the lifespan of a person within if you take all the differences, keep the differences apart, on an average, as compared to the majority white community and other minority ethnic groups, on an average, their lifespan is nearly 15 to 20 years less. Now, this is a very staggering fact in our face. But the question is, what do you do in the short term through this piece of research or any health-related research to really improve, rates of diagnosis or prevention as one of the aspects of healthcare that needs really addressing? So in terms of coming back to the factors that I would say, it's again not important that in each piece of research you have to look at all these factors. I'm only sharing with you how we arrived at the kind of developing a good relationship with the local community organizations to be able to develop the kind of methodologies that we will be using. How did we arrive at that? By looking at the literature, looking at what the outcomes are, trying to identify by having discussions with the community members about whether cancer was important for them or not. Yeah, 5 minutes. Yeah, and keeping in mind all these different differences within the community. So we came to the conclusion that historical factors, structural factors, and socio-cultural factors, all 3 sets are important in terms of the issues that they were facing in relation to poor outcomes for cancer. So now, in terms of the choice of methods, now we have been working very closely with the York Travelers Trust and other community organizations through whom we have really developed organic relationships over course of time through previous research that we have done in the team. That's not to say that I have done it, but other members of the team have been able to do that. Then what we've also tried to do in terms of an example of inclusive methodology is to say that can we actually use the community workers themselves through training and working with them and having these discussions with them to be able to be not only a link in terms of providing access to the samples for actually developing the methods and using the methods in the community with us. And the outcome in this case is going to be 2 toolkits, one to improve the knowledge and understanding and access to care for the communities, and the other one is also to train the healthcare practitioners to be able to improve communication and access and understand the barriers that the community might have. So it's a 2-way process involving all these different, I don't like using the term stakeholders, if you like, right from the beginning of the process to be keeping a focus on the outcomes, and sometimes needing to think out of the box. For example, I'll give you one quick example and I'll shut up after that, is York NHS services have tried using a very small pilot about smoking cessation within the community, and Violet, who's the CEO of the York Travelers Trust, said that they actually didn't really have any impact on outcomes. Not a single person in that group of some 15 or how many odd people they had, the men, stopped smoking. So the question is, if it works in the wider community, why doesn't it work here? And her answer is that if you have such significant structural and historical factors underpinning poor health outcomes, let's not expect that the outcome of this intervention, which would possibly is like in 3 months' time or in 6 months' time, if you have 15 people in a trial, 3 people must have stopped smoking for you to say that this intervention is successful. So you can't do that. You can't turn around these people's lives in 3 or 6 months. And to expect them to really go and attend a smoking cessation group, which is miles away from where they live, when they don't have an access to car and they have very little money, is really a failure from start. So we've taken that on board to say, can we just move it back into the community and shift our goals to say it's not going to be 3 months or 6 months. Can we expand that time span to say, follow it up within a course, say, a period of 1 year, and see whether we can make even a very small dent in terms of building that understanding about why smoking might be bad for you and lead to bad health outcomes. So I've run out of time now, so I'm just going to stop there, and I'll be very happy to take questions.
Fantastic. Round of applause, please. So we're taking both presentations back to back, and then we'll have about 20 minutes or so for questions. So we've got Laura coming up next. And Violet's great from here.
Yeah.
She's got an honorary doctorate, I think, a couple of years ago.
I am also going to talk about Violet. You can't get Violet out of research.
No, you can't.
Lovely, thanks, Carisha. Brilliant, thanks everybody. Hi, it's nice to be here. I'm Laura Tucker. I'm a researcher in the School for Business and Society, specifically in the Mental Health Social Care Research Centre. Although we interpret social care very broadly and much more widely than the government does. I think I'm going to sit and talk today about a lot of things that are going to sound familiar and echo what Sangeeta's just said, actually. I think you're going to notice some themes that come through, looking specifically at the work that we are currently doing with Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities across Yorkshire and the North East around mental health and suicide. And I very much want to focus on some of those process elements and reaching out and actually how did this work come about. There we go. So a little bit of background first, for those who are not necessarily familiar. And I always include this slide when I talk about work with Gypsy, Roma and Traveller communities, because that term doesn't mean anything to a lot of people within those different communities, precisely because it's an umbrella term. They are not the Gypsy, Roma, Traveller community, or even the Gypsy, Roma, Traveller communities. They're English Gypsies, they're Irish Travellers, they're Slovakian Roma. That's how they build their identity. And while they know there are other people in these sort of nomadic communities, they don't group themselves together in the same way as we have around this nomadic habit of life. So GRT is a government term. It's a definitional term used by the government to capture this diverse range of ethnic groups that we have. There are other travelling communities who do so through lifestyle or economic reasons, but the GRT term tends to refer to those people who fall into it within an ethnic group. We don't actually know how many of them there are. They're quite a hidden population in a lot of ways. We've got some figures from the ONS around 175,000, but the real figures actually anticipate to be a lot higher because a lot of people don't declare their ethnicity for reasons that we'll talk about. And just to really highlight that point, these are people with a real nomadic history. They've come from a lot of different places. They've moved around a lot of different ways. And as Sangeeta said, there's huge cultural diversity among these groups. But we talk about them as nomadic people, and an important point to bear in mind is that a lot of them aren't. It's quite hard, especially in England nowadays, to live a nomadic lifestyle. The legal framework isn't really there to support it. The legal framework actually challenges it. And around 3/4 actually live in settled housing. There's only around estimated 3,000 travelling caravans around England at any given point. So mental health. A little bit of background around mental health to understand the context of our research. There's quite a lot we don't know about mental health in these communities. Their mental health outcomes are quite poorly measured for them. Engagement with mental health services is relatively low as far as we know, assuming that people are disclosing that they are Gypsy or Roma or Traveller and they access services. But they're generally seen as one of the most health disadvantaged groups in the UK, and their mental health inequalities are estimated as being poor even by comparison to other disadvantaged or disenfranchised groups. They have very high rates of anxiety and depression. They have very high rates of suicide predictors, and we see disproportionately high suicide rates reported anecdotally. There has been some research recently done at Bristol that does indicate that actually, statistically speaking, we see higher suicide rates from particularly Gypsy and Traveller women by comparison to other ethnic minority groups. There are issues around worsening mental health linked to racism and discrimination, and as Sangeeta said, very high levels of socioeconomic disadvantage, which will increase their mental health risk. But it's not easy to do mental health support with these communities. Because they're hidden, they often don't disclose their ethnicity, especially those who are able to mask it. We'll talk about, you know, they'll enrol their children in school as being white British rather than white Gypsy or Traveller, because they don't want their kid to be the Traveller kid. They don't want that kind of bullying to happen. So they're hidden in plain sight very regularly. They're quite mistrustful of the state because of historic experiences and current experiences as they perceive it of discrimination and unfair treatment, and whether that's happening or not, that's how they experience it. And I would say my estimate would be that in some cases it is happening. This group is experiencing discrimination and unfair treatment. They certainly feel they do, and they don't trust the systems and the state. And as an added bonus for doing mental health work with the communities, across all of the communities that I've spoken to, mental health is a very stigmatised, very sensitive health topic. It's a private issue. You don't talk about it. You don't talk about it to family and friends because there's a lot of shame linked to it. So people are very much on their own with mental health. When they do reach out to services, they can struggle with services that are culturally inappropriate, culturally unaccommodating, and then they'll withdraw back into the communities. So there's quite a lot of systemic barriers around accessing that support. And for us, as researchers, some of that is a real issue that actually impacts on our research work with the communities as well. Because when I say they don't trust the state, that kind of includes us. We might not see universities as the state, but it's not about what we define. It's about how that people see us. So they don't necessarily trust us as researchers. They don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about the topics that we're interested in looking at. And yet, we have ended up in a situation where we're doing 2 research projects with these communities at the moment. The first is a collaborative partnership that's looking to find effective ways to reach out to people in the communities, especially those who often don't get involved in this kind of work, around mental health, to build our understanding of mental health from their perspective and to think about how we can do something about that. And the second one is also a collaborative project, which is looking at community-led approaches to suicide prevention, drawing on community strengths and looking at what can come in from the outside. And the reason that both of these projects exist is because by good fortune on my part, was able to access 9 months' worth of funding from Tees and Ware Valley NHS Trust to do engagement and consultation work with the communities. They wanted me to do a research project in 6 months about why people don't access mental health services, and when I stopped laughing, I said no. No, because they're not going to let me in the door, but will you let me do engagement, consultation, relationship building work that could then lead us into something else? They said yes, and that worked. And what I really want to talk about now is how that worked for us as a team and maybe some of what we can take forward from that. So I've described both of those projects as collaborative. And what do I mean? What does our collaboration look like? And it's our little pyramid of collaboration. And it's not a pyramid in the sense that it's hierarchical. It's a pyramid in the sense that there's more people on that lower level than there is on that top level, just from a logistical point of view. So this is all about shared power between the community organisations, the community members and the academic researchers. This is not about us going in there to do research on them. This is about us going in there to do research with them with the aim of trying to improve things. So we've built our project around the idea that research activity is not the special domain of academics, and I think Sangeeta said something similar about actually community members are part of the research team. People in the community organisations are part of the research team. They're part of designing what they do. We're part of building what we're building, rather than us as researchers saying, we will do the research like this and you will comply and you will work with us in these models. So we've got 3 levels of involvement from our community members to give people a voice and to draw on their experience and expertise in designing things. At the top there, the littlest group is our community co-investigators. We have 2, one of whom is Violet at Travellers Trust. And we also have Michaela in the North East, who are both community members, both part of the core research team alongside academics and the other community organisation that we're working with, and both making sure that sort of Gypsy and Traveller voices are being strongly represented here. We have our community researchers, which is staff from within the community teams that we've funded, and some of those are people from outside the communities who work with them, and some of them are community members who also work with them. So their time is bought to be part of this research team and build this research project. And then we have our peer researchers, who are our broader community members, who are coming in to talk to us about what we're doing, how we're doing it, what will work, what won't work, how can we get people in the door to talk to us about mental health, how can we get them in the door to talk to us about suicide, and how do we do that? So they're all part of building this, and we've done the work with them right from the very beginning of the project. How did we do that? How did we build our collaboration? And I would say there's a lot of pieces that came together for this. That 9 months that Tuve bought me was incredibly helpful because it gave me the time and space to go out and do the sort of legwork and the groundwork on building this. And one of the first things I would say is this recognition that actually if you want to work with a community that you're not part of, you have to recognise that their insider expertise is right there. It's right there and it's invaluable because you're coming in as a researcher. That's great, you've got research expertise. They've got expertise about the community, about being part of the community, about working effectively with the community, and you need to bring those 2 things together. So it's about being very aware that actually you are not in the position of power here as a researcher because you need these people. If you're not going to work together, your project is going to struggle and your research will struggle and it won't speak to the communities if you're not thinking about the community perspective. One of the big things for me was a big understanding that trust is hard-earned with these communities, linking back to those issues around mistrust and previous discrimination. Hard-earned, easily lost. Takes time, takes patience, takes consistency. I went along to sessions to meet with people week after week after week after week. The first time I walked into a session where they knew I was coming, and the sort of person who was facilitating the session reminded them who I was. It was like the tide withdrawing, as they all kind of went, I'm just going to go over here and do something else. They didn't throw me out. They didn't ask me to leave. But they took their time. They didn't trust entirely. They were watching me out. They were scoping me. It's very much personal. Relationships are personal. They build a relationship with the person rather than the individual. I got in the door a lot of the time on borrowed trust from my insider facilitators, from Violet at the Travellers Trust, from a nurse who'd worked with the communities for 12 years, from the team at Way Through up in the North East who do outreach work supporting community members. They got me in the door, but then it was I could borrow that trust, but it was important to not betray that. So actually I needed to take the time and allow the space for community members to engage with me on their terms rather than walk in and go, I have got an agenda. I also spent a lot of time saying, help me to understand your community, your culture, the things that are important to you. Actually, I'm no expert in this. I've read around this topic, sure, but often when I read around this topic, it talks about GRT communities. And pretty much the first thing you've told me is that's not a thing. So tell me about you. Tell me about what it's like to be a traveller. Tell me about your life. Share your culture. Share the good things about you. Tell me about the things that aren't so good to help me have that understanding and think about my own unconscious biases and the cultural discrimination that's built in. There was also something really important about recognising, and this is back to power again, recognising and addressing the burdens of research, not just for the participants who take part, but for community organisations when you involve them. They are small, they often have limited resources. They are not an addendum to your research, they are central to it, and they have to be part of building into the plan to make sure that they have the resources to do this without stopping them from doing their own core work as well. Fair financial decision making, recognition of participant and peer researcher contribution financially goes a long way to demonstrating that you do value people you value their role. And recognising the baggage that came in with me, because I had the advantage that other teams in the University of York had done research with the communities and it had not been bad. So the University of York label was not a bad label to be coming along with to initial discussions. But actually, people have bad experiences of research. I wanted to talk about mental health. They have bad experiences of mental health. That baggage influenced what I was doing and the work I was bringing in with me. And the key thing for us really around this being collaborative was about building a shared agenda. That actually, are we researching the same thing? Are we interested in doing the same thing? And I've pulled these two slides up. These are from a presentation that Violet and I did last year about why we were doing suicide prevention research. And I'll let you guess which one is mine and which one is Violet's. But mine goes, here's all of this academic stuff about why this topic is important. And then also the bits for me personally about why I think it's important and why I'm interested in it. And Violet's is very much, why is this happening to my community? But there are correlations between them. Yeah, there's links between, actually, we don't understand what's happening. Why? And Violet saying, why is this happening? Why is no one talking about it? Why isn't it in the policies, which is what's gone into mine? We're using different language, but actually we've got a similar goal. And one of the key things I would say, and I despise the term difficult to engage, but if you're finding it difficult to involve a community in your research, then you aren't offering something that they want or need. Yeah? Where are your shared priorities? Why should they care about what you care about? So on that note, to build that shared agenda, it was very much a case of coming in with ideas, not answers. I walked into my meetings with York Travellers Trust, with the team at Way Through, with the other sort of gatekeepers that were helping me access the community, and said, look, I think there's something we can do about this. Do you want to work together? I can bring research expertise, I can bring methodological knowledge, I can bring researcher skills, you bring community knowledge. Is this important to you? And the reason we have 2 projects out the back of this is because the answer was yes. Yeah, it was yes from the community organisations, and when they spoke to people within their communities, it was yes from a lot of them as well. These are problems, these are things, we don't know how to fix them, but we want to fix them. And that was my second part about that, is this has got to be about tangible mutual benefit. What are you getting out of this as a researcher, but what are they getting out of it as a community? Because if this is another research project to find out about the factors that cause, Sangeeta said it, they've done that. We've done the factors that cause. What are we going to do about it? What's the next steps? How do we start fixing things? How do we start making things better? How do we start addressing these problems? Which is why both of our projects are focused on how do we develop a community understanding of mental health that will then feed into how we address that? How do we develop a co-produced suicide prevention approach that can then feed into policy and practice? Our tangible outcomes are very much about informing how work is done. Being prepared to ask more than once or holding the questions for an opportune moment. While everybody knew from the very beginning of the engagement work that I did with the communities why I was there, in the sense that I was a mental health researcher, that's not always what we talked about. If it wasn't the right time to bring those kinds of questions up, we didn't talk about that. We talked about housing, we talked about the kids, we talked about research as a concept, we talked about life as Gypsy or Traveller members. And I'm using Gypsy and Traveller here a lot because the community I got the best in with initially were the Gypsy and Traveller communities. So the English Romany, English Gypsies, English Travellers and Irish Travellers. And the Roma community outreach is work we're still doing at the moment. But you've got to be patient. You can't walk in with your agenda in 3 minutes, right? Conversation happens quickly on comfortable topics. People are happy to chat, actually. If you're approachable and friendly, they were more than happy to chat. It's just that you don't bare your soul to a stranger. So you need time to build relationships if you want to talk about sensitive and difficult topics. And on that note, they are not backwards about telling you to get lost if you breach that. Yeah, they'll cut a conversation off. Firmable, absolutely not. But if they're leading that conversation and they get to bring those topics up, actually they will talk about things. I have had conversations with people around mental health, the nature of mental health, why we should care about mental health, where they're the ones that have brought us there. Conversations that started around, housing. What's happening with your kitchen extension have ended up at, I'm so stressed and it's really hard to sleep. Yeah? We move around these topics and ideas. Being very flexible in approach, in terms of what we did. Walk and talk, coming along to mother and toddler groups, playing with the kids while we're chatting. Not doing a sort of almost formal discussion pretty much ever. Chatting over coffee. And locations matter. And I met people where they were and where they wanted to meet. I let them choose the spaces. And if that was at their homes, that was at their homes. If it was at somewhere like Travellers Trust, it was at Travellers Trust. Because it was about building those relationships. And it's not about me dictating what happens where. And that's all partially about thinking about power and context, mitigating for disempowerment, because these are communities that feel very disempowered and are very aware of that. Yeah, they're very aware of the discrimination, they're very aware of the sense that their life is harder than everybody else's, and that's how they feel about it. So trying to mitigate that has helped. And I just want to do, with my last couple of minutes, an acknowledgement of the sort of barriers around this, because it's hard to work very flexibly with communities. I was lucky. I got 9 months worth of funding to do this work. Actually, university structures have quite limited capacity for this. If you don't have free time, who has free time? Getting out there to do this initial work is challenging. What funders ask for is quite limiting, because they tend to go, please tell us exactly what you're doing and in exactly what timeframes. But actually, I got around that by saying, we're going to do something that looks like this. These are the examples of the kinds of things we're going to do, but because we're building it collaboratively with the community and you have not given me the money to do that, it might not look exactly like this, but it'll be along these lines. And that worked twice. They gave me funding on 2 projects for saying that. University systems are not well designed, funder systems are not well designed for diverse and differing research activity. Actually being able to pay community groups is very difficult under the university's processes, and it can come with quite high administrative burdens. Please fill out this piece of paperwork, please complete this DEI form, please complete this due diligence form that goes on for 5 pages and has questions that have nothing to do with your organisation. And these ones are quite challenging to address. They need to be done. We help where we can, but we need our community partners to do it. But some of the rigid financial rules that seem to be in place, actually on negotiation, we can get around some of those. We can find new ways of ensuring that people get paid for their participation without having to share personal information with the state as represented by this university. So negotiation with your finance teams can be helpful in finding solutions that give them what they need and also make things accessible to the community and don't feel like a barrier. And if you're flexible in your planning, when you go to your funder, it helps at field work because you've built that flexibility into your design. And also research conventions that risk being box-ticking activities, and I am looking at ethics here as one of the examples. But actually, I've went and had a big long chat with the chair of my ethics committee about the fact that my research does not look a lot like other research necessarily, and it's all a bit movable, and what we're doing is very fluid. And that's helped us to unpick what's our hard limits versus what's research conventions, and how can we make this ethical without forcing it to fit into a box it doesn't fit into. That's going in this week. I'll let you know how it goes. But there's potential for innovation. Question the processes. Sometimes they're valid and sometimes they don't. Have I got another minute, Deborah? Last slide. This is last slide. 5 key messages. Effective collaboration involves recognising strengths and addressing disempowerment. You are a team. You are not doing to, you are doing with. Be open about the different strengths that everyone's bringing, and be open about your own limitations as well and why you need the strengths from the rest of the team. Engagement is not difficult, but if everything happens on our terms, by our rules, by our conventions, what possible reason is there for people from different communities to get involved? All we're doing is reinforcing historic trauma. And actually, for people in the communities, they can accept what we can't change and the annoying processes that we have to go through if they see evidence that we have challenged other things. The working relationships based on trust weather those kind of challenges. Thank you, I'm done. I did warn people I could take the whole 3 hours for myself.
So, thanks so much for staying at the front door as well.
Yeah,
Thanks to really great presentations. We've got about 15, 20 minutes or so for questions and discussion. So we'll just hand it over to the floor before the coffee break. So if you'd like to raise your hand if you'd like to ask anything, and we'll take some questions from both. Right, just while people are thinking, can I kick us off on a question?
Sure, I was about to say we've just overwhelmed people.
About funders in particular. Yeah, about funders and interactions with funders in particular. Because I think it's a source, and both of you touched on this within both of your talks. So GT, you were talking a bit about, well, why cancer and not diabetes? And part of that is because of the Yorkshire Cancer Research and the pots available for that. And you were touching on some of the work you've had with funders and those interactions. One of the real frustrations I always have with it, and you were both touching on the importance of engagement and building partnerships, is how difficult it is to fund that work, particularly if it's work that's not tied to either an NIHR pot or an existing funding scheme. And I think for GRT, this Roma traveller and Gypsy communities, there's a lot of health research in a way where actually you'd almost want to do more socio-economic research, but it's harder to make that case for the funders. So could you say a little bit more about, I suppose, what you think funders need to do to change, and any positive engagements maybe you've had with funders or tips and tricks? Or you were touching a bit about this at the end as well. I'd be interested in what you make of that.
Do you want to go first?
I think it's well, with the cancer thing, although quite a lot of that was coming up, and you're right, it's either education or it's health in a very non-specific manner. But because there is no baseline data, I think that was one of the challenges. And in this case, because the Yorkshire Cancer Research came to the university and through some very circuitous mode, got round to Carl and to our team, and we were happy to have a chat. But when we looked at the form and the call, there was nothing, we just couldn't fill that form. It's not doable. They assume you're running a trial. They assume you're running a trial that's been piloted, so you're not actually trialing a trial. The instrument has to be there, and so we said, what are we going to do with this? And at the same time, I think, to be fair to them, and we don't know what the intention was, but addressing inequalities was big on their mission statement in the previous budget. So they have lots of money. And with the York Travellers Trust, that had been one of the issues with several health conditions, including mental health, that had been raised as a potential area to look at. And we had a chat with Violet, and she thought that this would be something that would be of importance because of the very poor outcomes, and also because there's no baseline data. Then we had a discussion with them, and it was trying to sort of tweak out to say, how can we fit a very sociological model of doing research within this predefined idea that their research only funds ABCDE. I have to say that there was somebody in there, head of research, who was very open to that conversation, and because it fitted a lot of their boxes, we think, about equality and diversity, and also a lot of healthcare practitioners who have raised the concern that access to uptake of screening and late diagnosis from very small studies. There's no national epidemiological data. So we really made a case which was very theoretical and policy-oriented to say there's no baseline data, there's no epidemiological data. That itself is a huge factor in reinforcing the inequalities. So we are going to propose alternate methodology, which is to basically go and do a community survey. So we said we didn't have a clue to know where this, how do we define this community, where is it? We didn't know. So we spoke to different organizations and what do you think what might be the potential numbers? Can we have a community survey, which was Violet's idea actually, to say, because of the issue of people not wanting to disclose their ethnicity, the NHS doesn't have ethnicity monitoring data, is very poor, as we know, broadly. But in this case, people will tick the white box, especially in relation to health, because they don't want to be discriminated against, which is what I was talking about. So we said the only way, if you don't start somewhere, we'll be there 20 years later looking at exactly the same picture. So let's go do a community survey and ask people how they would do ABCDE, and then the next stage do focus groups to look at the experience within that wider, say, 200 odd families, to say, can we identify people who have had some experience of cancer or access to screening ABCDE, and from that take a smaller sample and then see what that actual experience can tell us about improving stuff. Now this was fine, but that's not an intervention. So we had to really redefine, think really very creatively out of the box. Okay, at the end of that, that's not what they want. They want a concrete outcome which then can prove you can save potentially X number of lives at the end of 2 years or 5 years. So I think that was hard to crack. And we said, okay, they said, are you going to be developing some toolkits? And another big, it's another big buzzword. I have to say, we've used it successfully in other cases. But here we didn't have a clue to, you're talking about a community where the language access to literacy is a difficult issue as it is. The language and communication are difficult. So what is this toolkit going to look like? So we did a bit of research, and WHO has something, then the Cancer Research in UK has CAM, which is an instrument which they've used in ethnic minority communities. And the Hull York Medical School has actually done some excellent work with GTR communities and other so-called marginalized communities. So can you adapt that instrument? So then we said if we use that as a base in terms of gauging what the level of, going by what we felt was what might be the issues, then we can do that. But again, you can't have one, then you need two. So it's not just a question of gap in communication because people don't understand that this is cancer and hence I may not go and seek a diagnosis, but are the services culturally appropriate enough in the right place at the right time? And is there trust there for people to be able to go and seek advice and go in for screening? And there are massive issues with screening. I mean, it's not very easy. So we said we'll do two, but use the community health liaison worker and the team that we will build there as a resource to actually train the healthcare practitioners. So Carl and I are not going to go and do the training. So two toolkits at the end of that, and somehow because that had come from them, so we thought a bit more flexibly to say, okay, we know what we can do very safely, is the methods we know we can use. And then just left it a little bit open in terms of now we don't know whether CAM is really going to work or not. We've not been there, we don't know that. Yeah. Other people's experiences if we can use in other situations where there is an issue with literacy. So we said we can take it in the community and let them decide how we want to really actually shape that. So we had to say that. We didn't say, so where is the toolkit? So we don't know. We have to develop that and see at the end of that how that.
Absolutely. Laura, anything to add to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that we don't know thing was a core part of my, what will be your outputs? I don't know. I suspect they'll look something like this, but I haven't found them yet. And I haven't fully designed this work with the community. So for me, there was quite a lot of, look, we're going to do something that looks along these lines, but you have not yet given us the money to do the development work with the community. And that was actually a core part of the proposals that we put in. The PPI money is here in our bid so that we can do this full development. We don't exploit people by asking them to work for free. What I did do, because you're right, the problem is that advance work. I had the money from TUV, which was helpful. I managed to tap into a bit of internal funding in the university because right place, right time, to also give people a small amount of payment, but not very much. But the other thing that I did was I didn't ask people to come in for a specific thing or come in specifically to meet me. On those initial discussions, I went to where they were. I dropped into groups, facilitate, there was a mother and baby group, there was a catch-up club, those things people were already at, and said, are you happy to talk to me for 10 minutes just about what I'm thinking about and tell me if you think it's a rubbish idea or not? So it was more of that preliminary PPI work was quite light touch, precisely because it wasn't resourced. But I also think there's a pushback at a higher level than ours. There's a sort of strategic level pushback to funders, because in health, the NIHR is doing quite well around this, really. That's not necessarily the same in other areas of research, and I think there needs to be a pushback to funders about actually increasingly we're talking about the importance of PPI and public involvement in research and sharing power in these ways. You've got to resource that ahead of the fact. Where is your seed funding? Where is your pot of money for people to do these initial pieces of work with communities, with groups, whoever the focus of your research is, so that their voices are genuinely part of the research when it comes through?
It's interesting, Lloyds Bank Foundation, I don't know if you've seen the local collaboration fund that they've just launched. Look at it if you haven't, because even some funders now, they have a bit more margin of maybe what they can do. So well, we don't want to fund the intervention, we just want to fund the collaboration, because we know that can lead to change. And that sort of stuff. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments? Yes, we'll go there.
Question. Thank you both for your presentations. I've just been really interested to hear about your experiences, and thank you for showing us today. My question was for Laura. So I was really interested to hear a little bit about the work you've done through Institute and through the programme run. I'm a CAMS researcher. The study that I work on is kind of looking at community-based interventions for mental health in children and young people. And I just wondered, kind of from your discussions around mental health, within the community, if there was any conversations around that or any potential future research.
Yeah, why are our kids dying?
Yeah.
Because actually suicide rates among children are high in the communities as well. And again, it's back to that point of it's not measured. This is all anecdotal evidence, but let's be fair, if you're part of that community and you're going to children's funerals, that anecdotal evidence means a lot more than numbers, frankly. So yes, there are concerns around children's mental health, there are concerns about children's suicide, but there is also that stigma and shame around talking about mental health. So there's some reluctance. I don't want to talk to my children about mental health. Those are dirty words. And one of the things that we're doing with ours is trying to... We're dropping that language quite a lot of mental health and suicide, and we're talking about being overwhelmed, things getting too much, life stresses overwhelming you, reaching out for help, and normalising the language a lot more to try and... Which is one of the things that's come up in the discussions with our peer researchers, to try and bring more people in and stop those being barriers, because those words, mental health and CAMS, are barriers in and of themselves, especially when people have not had good experiences with CAMS, and CAMS is obviously such a taxed service at the moment. It's there, and it is a concern, and it's a thing that even if people aren't talking about it, they're aware of it.
If you've got, if there are any other kind of future studies or things like that,
you should email me and we should talk about this because I would love to get the kids involved in this.
We have just kind of anecdotally, just from our study, we did have one young person from the Gypsy community who participated. It was only when we were filling out the demographic data that it became kind of apparent that I've always kind of thought about that young person and why they kind of wanted to take part and things like that.
It's not something that they can get away from. Even though it's shameful, it's not talked about. Actually, because of the link with suicide and mental distress, and those are experiences that people are living with, even if they're topic non gratis. So it's there.
Thank
you both. It was really, really interesting, and in particular, I was really struck, Laura, by what you said about borrowing trust. I thought that was really interesting, and I guess my question's kind of around that, because you've obviously both worked with the Travellers Trust, and I'm going to be working with them as well, and you both mentioned Violet, for example, and I guess my question is around what we as researchers can do to make sure that we're kind of perhaps not actually exploiting or overtaxing or relying too much on, as you said, kind of community groups or particular individuals perhaps as well to do all this kind of work, because Violet's working with lots of different departments, YTT work with lots of different departments, so I wonder what we as researchers can do to perhaps make sure that we're better kind of communicating with each other and kind of thinking about how, not just what our projects are doing, but actually perhaps how they all work together in different ways. So I guess that's kind of one strand of the question, and perhaps the other one is about, we've talked about kind of hard to reach communities and how problematic that kind of term is, but actually when there's one particular group like the Travellers Trust that is being used so frequently, perhaps what does that do to kind of the landscape of research, perhaps, if that makes sense?
Great, Shaji, just start you.
Yeah, I think that's a very, second part especially is a very fascinating question to ask. Because I'm personally quite aware of the fact that, as I was saying, I was talking about imagined communities, which is a term that Anderson uses a lot. It's about, just as much as the communities have a self-perception, but every community organization also has a very standardized history of themselves. And it's very interesting, for example, if in our discussions with the individual participants, people would always say, look, I'm a gypsy or I'm a traveler, depending on how they saw their life, what their lives had been. But there is a standardized notion of, are they really calling themselves travelers? I'm very surprised by that, because we are all gypsies or ABCD. I'm just using that as an example. So there is an issue, but it's a question of also how that community organization is located within the larger community, and looking at the history of that organization in relation to the work that they're doing. And we just saw a glimpse of that during post-COVID time when we looked at that. And also that, unfortunately, because of the historical and the structural reasons, is there any other way one would find into the community? Which links to your first question of trust. And what do we really mean by that trust? To a large extent, a lot of that borrowed trust, even though it might not be borrowed in other circumstances or working in other, what I would call maybe more sensitive issues, but any participation of a person, from the community, which binds them into a relationship with a researcher, as a researcher or as an anthropologist or observer, there is that notion that there is a boundary between what you're finding there and what you're coming back, how you're writing about that and how you're presenting it to the world, that one needs to respect that, and that is the other side of the trust. So there's some very generic issues there, but in this case, yes, it is a question of, who are we representing, and without assuming that, giving somebody a voice is not it's not in my gift in many ways. Yeah, but can you get around that to say that, how would we get, the thing is that then there's a gatekeeper there, which then in this case is the York Travelers Trust, and there is overuse of the community in many senses. Sometimes I will say, look, we don't want to do this because...
Yeah, I think there is overuse of the community in York precisely because of York Travelers Trust, because of the work that they've done and their focus around bridging that gap between the local Gypsy and traveller communities and the mainstream community. So if anyone's ever been down to Travelers Trust, they have like a coffee morning where they throw open the doors of their office, which is down in Clifton, to everybody. There's a tea room, yeah? If you're in the local community, come in and have a coffee. If you're a member of the Gypsy and Traveller community, come in and have a coffee. Come and have coffee together and talk to each other. That'd be good. So a lot of their work is around bridging those gaps. And it does mean sometimes it can be easier to get in, I think, with the community in York because of the work that they've done. Because I'm also doing work in the North East, and there's much less of that sense of a sort of central hub where we can get into. But I think it's about actually... Travellers Trust are your easy answer. Yeah. Are there other means to access people in Gypsy and Traveller communities? Does it have to be York? Could you go to Leeds and talk to Leedsgate? Could you go up to the North East and talk to Waythrough? Can you build connections and make connections in other ways? I had real trouble finding Roma communities, like real trouble finding Roma communities. And then I advertised a job to come and work on my projects on 1 day a week because we had some overfunding. And one of the people who applied was a Roma lady. Didn't have any of the research experience, but she was a Roma and a proactive Roma, and I sat with HR for like 3 weeks going, I cannot offer this woman a job interview, she doesn't meet the criteria, but I really want to talk to her because she clearly wants to be involved, and actually she might be a means to help me reach out to the communities that I can't find. So I think there's something around thinking about the burden and how do we spread it, but I also think you're absolutely right that there's a lot of research with these communities going on. They're very high on everybody's EDI priority list at the moment. And there's lots of research going on in the university in little pockets. I'm doing my bit, Sangeeta's doing her bit, which I was aware of. Other people are doing other bits in other areas. And maybe one of the things we need to think about as an institution is setting ourselves up a GRT network of if you are doing research with the GRT communities, come talk to us. I think that should be hosted by somebody who is able to organise such things.
We're very nearly out of time, but I'll give Hannah time for a plug.
I love that you can see how transparent I am.
I heard that question and thought it's going over there at some point before I finish.
So I'm Hannah Gray, Head of Public Involvement at the University and leading the involvement at your project. Resource service, what do we call ourselves? Team, thank you. I just wanted to flip the question that came over there, which is how do we ensure that we're not overusing York Travelers Trust? Well, I would ask them, do you feel over-asked by the University of York? And my initial response was, if the answer is yes, often these organisations, formally or informally, are linked to something bigger, a national network. So it could be that, do you have any links in the region with other groups that you might be able to put us in touch with? So there's that. There's also the network that we hold, that we've been building over the past 6 years. So it might be that we have some groups on our list that could, or other public involvement groups and other universities that are speaking to these particular communities, that through our network and links and contacts we can put you in touch with. So equally,
an opportunity for us to ask. So, hello, we're Involvement at York. We've got a researcher who's interested in this. Would you be interested in talking to us about perhaps some of your members or some of the people that drop in for coffee regularly, hearing about how they might get involved in research, become peer researchers, etc., etc., etc. So it's starting a conversation.
What I might do, oh sorry, Lloyd.
I was getting one point on that. If they think it's an important topic, they'll say yes, because they don't want the community to miss out on the opportunity. So think about resourcing. It was just following on from your point, do they want to do it? They'll say yes in a sort of, we'll make it work somehow, because that's often how these organisations work. So actually think about, are we resourcing York Travellers Trust? How much demand am I putting on them, and what am I giving them to meet that demand in terms of the work that I'm doing?
I'm plugging now.
As long as it's 20 seconds.
Okay, 20 seconds. One of the reasons that the EDI-RC Centre was developed is to help people to work outside of their silos. So we'll have that conversation, and I'm having a conversation with Anna as well about doing it in terms of disability. So we can have that conversation also.
I think it would be useful to know what the work we're doing, where it can cross over as well and complement, and where we can combine work rather than going do this project and this project and this project and this project with all the administrative burden that comes with each one. Can we do more interdisciplinary working and capture what the different elements of what we're trying to do?
Can we just do one last thanks, please? We've now got a coffee break till 5:02. So feel free to come on, and emails to be swapped in that coffee break no doubt as well. So we'll see you back in here at 5:02.
That's fine.
That was really interesting. Because I've never properly spoken to you about this. So it was really...
Hi. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. Ding, 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 ding. Hi. So we're going to get started with the second session. I hope you all got your cups of tea and coffee before the hot water ran out, because I went for mine just when it did. So, but we'll get a refill of tea and coffee soon. I will let you know as soon as it is ready. We're going to start our second session, chaired by Hannah, but our first speaker is Ben. Come on down, Ben, and give your amazing introductions.
No pressure, right? How are we all doing? Hello. Good to be here. So I'm going to talk to you about kind of co-production in York and what's going on within mental health services within York, and talk to you about kind of the power of it and what it's done, really. So yeah, we'll kind of jump straight in. Just fab. Yeah. Firstly, I thought, just in case, because when I talk to people and say I'm a co-production champion, people often say, what on earth is that? So I thought we'd maybe delve into a little bit about what co-production is. So the way that I see it, it's working collaboratively with service users, and I'm kind of out on that word, but we'll use that for now, to design and deliver services. It's an equal partnership between professionals and communities, and it's doing with, not for or to people. And its kind of benefits are that it services that meet the needs of the community. You build trust and you have sustainability, because you're making services that people have been involved in designing rather than just designing them to people and then they're not working. So for too long that's happened. So yeah, that's kind of my co-production. Right. So what does a co-production champion do? So if you'd have told me when I was with the careers advisor at 15 years old that I was going to be a co-production champion, I'd have been like, right, what on earth is that? And to be honest, I still do question it myself sometimes, because I am only 6 months into the role. So I'm the co-production champion for York across all mental health services. So I work with charities, I work with TUV, I work with the council, and I'm completely neutral in all of that. I'm hosted by CVS, but yeah, I'm Switzerland in all of this. That's what I have to say. My role is kind of to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, especially those who might not usually get a seat at the table. I kind of facilitate collaboration between service users, professionals, and stakeholders. Like I said, I'm translating feedback into actionable and inclusive solutions. Why it matters now. I'm somebody who used to use mental health services myself, so I kind of class myself as lived experience. I'm also diagnosed with ADHD as well, so I'm kind of jumping around all the time, that's what I do. But it's, yeah, I got into this because I saw how kind of rubbish mental health services were, I'm going to be honest, straight up. I found them incredibly difficult to navigate. Lots of different criterias, being told no here, no there, closed door here. So, yeah, I wanted to get into it and kind of, with people, kind of go to these services and say, look, this isn't working. So, yeah, that core aim to bring all voices together and ensure they shape the services we build. So, I'm going to tell you about a little bit about some of the projects that we've got going on at the moment. But I firstly wanted to kind of say, so when I came into the role 6 months ago, I was very much noticed that there was a lot of communities that weren't involved in the conversation, a lot of people who potentially did want to be involved as well, and it was really quick that I saw that when I did go and talk to those communities that they were really keen to be involved, just no one had asked them. So, yeah, so my early focus was to find a way to reach out and include them. So, yeah, I mean, it's, I know you talked about it a little bit, but it was a case of just going to these kind of community groups. I've been to all sorts. I've been to a Zumba class to talk to mums, and I played Dungeons and Dragons with the neurodivergent community. I've done all sorts. It's been wonderful, actually. So, yeah, it's and then I kind of slowly built those relationships. I was really lucky that I previously worked for York Mind, and I've worked in the charity sector for a little while now. So I did have some relationships that I could kind of tap into already. But some of them have just grown, and it's you've got to get that relationship right. If you're going to do it, if you're going to bring people into the conversation and get them designing services with people who run services, there's got to be a really, really strong relationship there. So, and again, changing the way that kind of I work and the way that we work in general, as I said, what do I need to do to fit the community's needs that I'm going to, whether it be the neurodivergent community, whether it be the travelling community. I'm having some conversations at the moment about how to speak to people. Do I need to set up a mobile thing that's neutral? How can I do it? Do I need to make sure that the place is sensory friendly? I mean, there's all sorts. I'm always thinking in terms of I've worked a little bit with Refugee Action York. Interpreters are needed in some occasions, and that's absolutely vital. So we can make that happen. Online, offline. What time of the day? I mean, I've spoken to some people at 9, 10 o'clock at night, because there's some people in the neurodivergent community who don't like the mornings. They're not morning people. That's absolutely fine. So I fit around them. And then the other one is evidencing real impact. So all the feedback that I get, all the groups that I go to, all the things that we do, I feed that into what's called the joint delivery board within York, which is there's loads of different sort of organisations within that. So you've kind of got York Mind, York Council, you've got Tuve on there, you've got a few different ones, and essentially they're the ones that decide what happens to services, but they have to go through me first. So if there's anything that they say, well, we're going to do this, I'm like, well, have you spoken to the community about that? That's not what I've heard. So I'm an absolute pain in their arse, to be honest. So, but I quite like being that. And I do challenge them all the time, which I just feel like is needed. And sometimes other people with lived experience will come to those meetings with me, and I think it's a really lovely thing that's happening there. It's difficult for people who are quite high up in services to relinquish some of that power. It can be really challenging for people, especially if you've worked in kind of the NHS for 30 years and you've got someone with lived experience telling you that the service is rubbish, in a more constructive way than that, but still. It can be really difficult, and that's I'm going to talk about that challenge a little bit later on as well. I'll go into kind of one thing that we've been doing. One group that I'm part of, which is the Neurodiversity and Mental Health Working Group. So I'll tell you a little bit about this one. It started initially as a feedback researchy kind of group, but over time it's kind of focused more on community-based support. It's a kind of space where anyone can access, literally anyone can come, and it's kind of just gives updates on what's happening across York, having open conversations around community-based support for neurodivergent individuals, and their families as well, I should say. So it's a shared space. Like I said, anyone's welcome. We have people from all different backgrounds there, And I mean, we get all sorts of different organisations there as well, so we kind of get some representation from Truve, the retreat come, we've got the ICB occasionally come as well, we've got some York Council representation there as well. So yeah, and it's about just talking and opening up that conversation around the challenges and what can be done better. So the group is run, and I'll just kind of let you know, so the group is run by Connecting Our City. You might want to do a little bit of looking into them, but they are a kind of project team overseeing various community-based support initiatives across York. So, what we've done recently, the group, we've identified a little bit of funding, and when I say a little bit, £30,000 really is a little bit. But what we've done is we identified this funding, and it was up to me to kind of talk to the community about what they want to do with this funding. So we kind of initially had some conversations within the group itself. We identified 5 different options, and then from those 5 different options we then took it to a survey which went out to just anyone who was interested, and from that we got down to 2 kind of different sort of core offers that we wanted to do with this £30,000 funding, which was the first one that came out was a peer support tailored to neurodivergent individuals, like a formal peer support offering, and the second was like a neurodivergent-led training for local organisations to make places more inclusive. That was one thing that came out, and I know I've experienced myself being ADHD that some places aren't too keen on having you when you can't sit at your desk for more than 20 minutes. But it's about them kind of working for us, not the other way around. I always feel, and I always challenge them. I'm like, well, why can't I just stand up and walk around for a bit and things like that? You know, if I'm getting my work done, what does it matter? So they were the kind of 2 things that came out, and I then ran co-design sessions from that. So we had 15 participants across 4 sessions, and we did online offering and offline offering, in person and offline, where we delved deeper into what these initiatives might look like in practice. You know, what does formal peer support mean to you? What do you need it to be? Do we put this out as a grant and tag along to an organisation that already has the kind of infrastructure there, such as maybe York Mind or the Rainbow Cafe in York and things like that. So yeah, we kind of all had a big chat. They were about 3 hours long, the sessions, so we got a lot from it, and I kind of then drafted up a report, which I think was about 25 pages, something like that, about suggestions moving forward. Everyone who was part of those sessions read the report that I'd kind of drafted, critiqued it, we kind of changed a few bits, and then that we're now going back to the group, which is in a couple of weeks, to kind of figure out, okay, so from that report, from all the co-designing that we did, what we're going to do now, how we're going to actually spend this money. Because there's one thing that I always find, like, we can talk a long time about things, but I'm actually about the action. So yeah, we are going to decide in that next group. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm just conscious about time, but I think we're all right, aren't we? Oh, I've got 3 minutes. Right, I need to rattle through this. All right, this is where we're going. So the other thing we're talking about at the moment is we have a, I don't know if anyone knows, we've got new mental health hubs opening in York. We're one of 6 places in the country that's just been given funding for a 24/7 mental health hub, which is going to be in Aiken. Now, so as you can see, there's going to be eventually 3 hubs across the city. Now, the values of this place is that everyone will be welcome. You don't need a referral. You can turn up whenever you want. There's no criteria. It is completely open access 24 hours a day. And it's a multi-agency hub as well. So you've not just got NHS Tube in there. You've got York Mind, you've got Tube, you've got York Carers, you've got, and we want to bring as many different agencies into this building as possible. So you've got that wide range. Sort of like a car garage, but for your mind. That's what I like to say. People seem to understand it when I say that. So, how do you make a mental health hub inclusive for everyone? Not an easy task. So we got 20 people in a room, 10 people with lived experience, and then 10 people from different services. So we had the police, we had crisis, we had representation from the church there, we had all sorts of different people. We had someone who was neurodivergent, we had someone who used to be homeless, someone who was struggling with addiction, myself like included, you know, and things like that. So we got them all in a room and got them to design a mental health hub, which it was not an easy task. And again, you know, we talk about it, there's some difficulties there, because you're bringing people into a room who may have had, you know, they might have had some real challenges with the services that are in that room. Potentially, you know, one, I'll name it, like crisis. You know, there's been some real difficult times with crisis recently. And, you know, we had someone who was on the phone waiting for 3 hours because they were suicidal. And we'd actually got them talking in a room together, which was challenging but rewarding at the same time, to understand each other's points of view and the strains that are on that crisis service, and that it wasn't that person that was the problem, it was just the system that we are in, which can be difficult. So yeah, I will kind of not go into the whole thing, but we did 4 sessions, and then we all fed back to like the wider kind of system on the 19th of December. I'll just quickly, so yeah, we had all sorts of different things happen. We had them kind of designing what they wanted it to look like, you know, what kind of, do we want comfy sofas in there, everything that you can imagine. And from that we got 4 sessions, we got 40 pages of insights. 1 minute left, thank you very much. Quickly, conversation cafes run every 6 weeks that I run as well. This is like an ongoing thing that we can get feedback from the community. Anyone is welcome to those. They run at 30 Clarendon Street, the hub which is there. So yeah, anyone can come to those. If you do want to come, let me know. It'd be lovely to see you. And we just chat about different things that we want to kind of see from mental health services, particularly around the hubs. My recipe for success, already mentioned by previously, but it's that building trust, offering accessibility, continuous reflection. I'm always asking who's not in the room, how can we get more people in the room, what community are we not listening to, and how do we do it, and collaboration, you know, being honest about the limitations sometimes, but also saying, look, you know, if we get together we can really make some changes here. Yeah. And finally, the impact, as we all know, more inclusive services, empowered voices, sustainable services, and just a strong community, because there's more ownership over the services that are being run. And I think I've rattled through that last bit, but there we are.
Thank you, Ben. That was absolutely brilliant. Next up, we've got Nicola here from the Production Collective. And are you being joined online, Nicola?
No, it's a video.
Okay, sorry.
Sorry. And the video is right there. Okay, cool. Alright. Hi everybody. So yeah, I'm Nicola or Nick, and Christophorus or Chris will be joining us via video. So I'm part of something called Co-Production Collective, based out of University College London, but we're kind of a community or network of people, and we all come with a shared passion for co-production, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. What I'm going to try my best not to do, though, is repeat what other speakers have said, because it's great, we're reinforcing each other, right? But I don't want to bore you all to death. But yeah, I fully support what people have already shared, and I guess this is the way that we show it to people, and when we try to describe what co-production means to us. And it is about working together in equal partnership for equal benefit. And, you know, so easy to say that. It's ridiculously hard to achieve in reality, you know. And so what we try to do is live these core values. They were co-produced by us as an entity when we started out back in 2017. And we continue to strive to live and breathe these values. That helps us to try to co-produce. And this term co-production, you'll hear bandied about a lot by funders, by universities, by health services, all sorts of areas within society. And I suppose what we set out to do was to try to support co-production spaces around the country, nationally, internationally, to kind of join up and achieve more together. So we are a kind of advocacy space, I suppose. We're trying to challenge funders, government, organisations to do better and to stop using it as a buzzword and actually genuinely mean it and genuinely do it properly. You know, and I mean, obviously I'm preaching to people converted here and a lot of attendees, but hopefully some useful things for
those of you who are trying to learn more to take away. So these core values, as I said, help us to live and breathe what co-production means to us. We try to be inclusive, so that means we adapt the way that we do things. Chris is joining via video because he didn't feel like he could travel to York. He wanted to be part of it, but he didn't want to travel. We think about actually all of the things that we need to do to make people to allow people to be in a space. We ask in advance. We don't assume that they will come and say to us if they need access for a wheelchair, for instance. We ask that, and we try to break down the barriers as much as we can, not expecting people to come into a scary, off-putting university building, but actually going where they are, like people have already said. We try to be really transparent, by which I mean we don't hide behind the kind of university doors and only tell people what we want them to know. We try to lay everything bare and, talk about the stuff that's really hard, and talk about money and, the challenges with the university, all those kind of things, because that helps us break down that power that we're trying to create a level playing field and share power and decision making. Have to be really embracing of change, by which I mean we're trying to challenge the status quo. We're always trying to think differently and not just go along with something because that's how it's always been. Ask the questions. I think it was yourself who said, just ask, negotiate, talk to people. Really important is reflection and reflexive practice. So trying to constantly question ourselves, learn as we go along, and feed that learning in, rather than waiting to the end of a project and going, okay, let's evaluate it. What do people like? What do they didn't? Well, great, but it's too late. What can we do now? So if we do that as we go along, we have reflective kind of sessions regularly. We think about what's working and what's not, so that we can feed that in as we go along. And a really, really important one is that we always try to be kind. Things are going to go wrong. People are going to have disagreements. They're going to argue about things. There's power at play here, it isn't always going to work. But if we try to keep that element of kindness in the way that we go about things, actually it helps us to unpick it. But what we have to do first is build that kind of trust and relationships so that we can do this together and we can get to a point where we can disagree. It doesn't matter, we move on, we work through it and we go forwards. So hopefully those help kind of frame it a little bit. Just wanted to mention this, so this kind of reinforces a bit what you were talking about, Ben. This is a piece of research we did around what is the value of co-production, because we were so fed up with people going, it takes so long, it's so expensive, why the hell should I bother, I'm not going to fund that because you don't know what it is and you're not telling me exactly what it is. So this research was 100 interviews, it was a survey completed by nearly 600 people, and it was what they call a rapid review of the evidence. So kind of like a systematic review, if you're familiar, looking at past research and pulling out key elements from it. These are what we discovered, but I will say it was ridiculously hard at points to do it because people don't really evaluate this type of work. So I guess my plea is please do take the time to evaluate and document what's working and what isn't, because then this piece of work would have been easier to pull those things together to help people, I guess, in trying to advocate for co-production as a methodology. But yeah, I mean, the things that we found are not rocket science, I think they probably reinforce what a lot of the speakers have already said. It is about delivering outcomes that actually matter to people, not what matters to a researcher in a university in the kind of ivory tower saying, my vanity project is I want to do this, and this. I'm not suggesting any of you do that, but that is sometimes what happens in a research world. But actually, why are we doing the research? For the greater good, right? To support things to improve. So co-production can really add value in that space. It connects us as humans, working towards shared goals. It helps us in working towards social justice. And the empowering people and building capacity or capability has a star against it, because some people really felt that it was important to include this, others hated it. They said, I've got all the power I need, what I haven't got is access, because these institutions are blocking me from getting involved and being a part of things. And then efficiency in the long run. Yes, it takes longer initially, yes, it might cost more money initially, but you save so much in the long run. You bypass kind of hurdles that you would hit anyway, you bypass them sooner or you address them sooner. Yeah, so again, hopefully something useful. It's available. We can share the links with you. Just wanted to mention this, which maybe helps frame some of the things you've already heard as well, but these are the parts of the puzzle that the Social Care Institute for Excellence suggests you need in place before doing this type of co-produced work. And if you have these pieces of the puzzle and you address them in advance, it does help you to be able to work in this way. So if you have the right culture, you have an open and inclusive and supportive culture within the team or organisation within which you're working, that supports co-production. And then the structures. So I think several people already have mentioned about payment. Think those things through in advance, have the conversations, work out how it's going to work, so that you don't get to the situation of doing the work and then go, oh, okay, I forgot to ask about that. I can't pay you because my university won't let you. Do that in advance and try and lay the groundwork. The practice is the doing of this, it's the actual ability to conduct this type of work, and then the review, that's what I've already mentioned. The reflection, the learning, and making sure that you feed that in. So, what I'm going to do now is share this video that Chris and I recorded. As I said, it's because we wanted to take a different approach to sharing the learning. Chris also asked me to say, please don't take offence at any of the language that he might use. He doesn't always feel like he articulates himself in the best way, which I disagree with, but just he asked me to say that, so I am sharing that with you. Hi there. So I wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself, Chris. Over to you.
Hi, conference, and very sorry for not being able to join you in person. I'm Chris Pavlakis, a member of the co-production collective, and with lived experience on the matter we discuss. As a matter of fact, I'm based in South London, and I've been diagnosed later in life with autism.
Thanks, Chris. So we're here to discuss a little bit about co-production collectives learning from being part of a number of projects focused on working with people often excluded from the development of research, services or policy. And so we wanted to have a bit of a chat together, didn't we, about sort of our experience, the impact of being excluded, and how we've gone about addressing some of the barriers, and also hopefully to give the listeners a few kind of hints and tips and things that they can do differently going forwards. Don't know. So Chris, do you want to start and we can explore some of the kind of impact that we've experienced of people being excluded? Is there anything you want to kick us off?
I think it must have been mentioned by now, but I will reiterate the production collective's commitment to ensuring that lived experience shapes design, delivery, decision-making processes of services at all stages in a meaningful way. And this has become a personal commitment rooted in personal and professional lives and experiences. I've seen that happening all the time, how services fail people that communicate differently, that live in vulnerable circumstances, depending on their status in society. And on the other side, I've seen the transformative impact of lived experience embedded into research teams, for instance, in making a real difference. I don't know if we can give an example from the collective's projects that were implemented in the past years. One that is very close to my heart is with respect to digital exclusion. When the pandemic hit, services moved online, and that created instantly an additional hurdle for some people. when trying to access them, especially for those that needed that kind of support with mental health issues, with various healthcare services, and they couldn't access because they couldn't afford to buy Wi-Fi, or didn't have the technical infrastructure at home, a smartphone or a digital device to go online, and they left behind. And this was 99% of times because the services were designed without properly considering that additional hurdle of, some socioeconomic reasons or skill-wide reasons why this choice may lead to marginalizing and eventually excluding some people from accessing these services. That's a very concrete example that I have it in mind, and it was very enlightening to myself to come to terms about the need of having multiple perspectives when designing and delivering a service.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose there's some small things you can do, like provide a little bit of money to cover people using internet and that kind of thing, but it doesn't necessarily, if they don't have access to a computer or a phone, then £5 per couple of hours to cover internet costs is not going to help, is it? So you do need to think about multiple ways to engage so that you can bring different perspectives together, and I suppose not expect everybody to be in the same space in the same way. We try to do a lot of work to address that, and I think sometimes I see a fear sometimes for people to do things in different ways because they think this is the way I'm supposed to do it. I'm supposed to run a workshop, online and ask people to join. Well, what we would suggest is doing different methods. Have one online, have something in person. I don't know, like have one-to-one phone call options, or a chance for people to write things down if they want as well, because then you aren't expecting everybody to fit in the same box, because not everybody feels comfortable. If they can get access to an online call, they don't always feel comfortable. They feel on show. They don't want to have a camera on. There's a project that Co-Production Collective were a part of supporting when we were sort of co-producing ourselves, which was called the Authentic Research Collective, and they spent a lot of time working together as a group of autistic adults to develop alternatives to cognitive behavioural therapies for people who are autistic, and they used a traffic light approach in meetings where you could put up your traffic light for that day, for that minute or hour of the meeting, to say, look, okay, well, at the moment I'm a red, I'm really not feeling able to be part of the conversation. The next day or the next time they met, they may be a green or an amber, but it was just that ability to have a tool that didn't involve them having to go, hi, look, sorry, I can't communicate today. Actually, it was a lot less invasive, and they could just put a colour, and that was the answer to it, and everybody respected that. Which I think is a really great way to do something, to make it less kind of on the individual to have to say, look, today I don't feel up to it.
That's a fantastic idea, concrete idea, to indicate preferences or needs on the spot. I've seen that in badges, in conferencing, and that can be a good practice, indicating the personal boundaries, setting personal boundaries of interacting with others, reflecting different communication styles. As an autistic in large crowds, not knowing anyone. It depends on the day and the personal energy levels to how social I can be. And how keen to go approach fellow attendees, speakers, and engage with them in conversations. Having, an indication of how far can I go or to be approached by others, having no bad intention, but not being aware of this personal communication style or, preferences of the day. It eases the pressure on me. It becomes less judgmental, and it dispels any assumptions we make about each other. So the traffic light is a very good practice.
Yeah, I agree. I think you talked about it before, but the danger of not including people who are marginalized by society or by research or is a massive issue, right? We might end up with the research being very kind of isolated and from a single perspective. I think it is really important we open up our work and really make sure that the person who is intended to impact, i.e. the person, the patient, the individual, the member of the public, actually is part of the decision making, because without that, this research and work is meant to be for greater good, right? To improve research, to improve services. So it really makes no sense to me why people wouldn't be a part of developing the work in the first place, wouldn't be a part of the decision making. And it really helps us to bypass what might be hurdles later down the kind of process of developing research if we have a broad team with lots of different types of skills and experience from the outset. But what is really vital, I think, is that those skills and experience are valued equally. And what we see a lot is people's skills and experience are not valued equally. Academic experience or practical experience is considered more important than a person's lived experience. And I don't know about you, but I've experienced many times people being sort of put on a stage and asked to perform their lived experience because they have to validate why they should be involved in things. And you don't see the same happening with somebody's academic experience. It's just considered a given. And I think that is an area that needs a lot of development, and it's what results in sometimes people feeling unsafe and not a trusted part of a co-production kind of setting or space. And I think it's really important to be aware of safety and safeguarding within co-production spaces, but not in the sense of how do we protect the organisation? How do we make sure that there's no risk to us as an organisation, as a university, as an institution? It's got to be about the safety of everybody involved, and that means I think that the safeguarding approach or policy needs to be co-produced by a group of people that includes people with lived experience, so that then actually those that get involved and see that know that their safety is considered as important as the safety of an employee of an organisation. Don't know what you think.
Definitely. You touched many important points. Let's discuss marginalization and as a verb, marginalizing voices that tend to reinforce the center, because certain people with certain characteristics have held the margins and cannot break the ceiling, the glass, if you like, to join teams of research and share their stories and provide their input based on their lived experience. And there are well-known reasons why this happens. It's systemic, it's deeply rooted. It has to do with power dynamics, socioeconomic status, ethnicity. I tend to believe that because of the devastating pandemic and the misery that brought at all levels, there is greater awareness now than before about the need to involve people with lived experience in research. because of all the reasons you explained very well. But this involvement, as you said, needs to be meaningful, not tokenistic. It needs to consider financial barriers when committing time and energy, needs to be well thought when it comes to safety, safeguarding. It's not only to invite them to take a seat around the table, but also to make sure that we feel safe, we feel appreciated, we feel valued, and our stories make a difference, and are not validated but recognized as a form of knowledge, the lead complementing the learned experience, learned knowledge. And this responds to one of the principles that underpin the work of the Co-Production Collective, what is our shared understanding. It's on equal footing and for equal benefit.
Sorry, we've kind of run out of time. There will be the link to the video in the slides, and I'm just going to, if I could find the slide, just going to put some details here. There's a few kind of summary points in the slides, and there's some resources and things which you're more than welcome to use. Yeah, just wanted to say thank you from myself and Christophoros, and hopefully it was some useful kind of thoughts and ideas.
Stay there if you want.
Okay.
It's questions next. So thank you to both Ben and Nicola. Just before we get on to questions, I do have not another plug for us, but a plug for something else, which is the universities of Liverpool, Sheffield and Manchester have come together and are running something called the Co-Production Futures Inquiry, which is very much worth looking into. They have a LinkedIn group, they have a website, and Nicola, you're sitting on one of their governance panels, aren't you?
Yeah.
So in addition to members from NIHR, the National Institute for Health and Social Care Research Funding Council, and UKRI membership on there, the aim for this Futures Inquiry at the moment is a call out for evidence. So if you have examples, good or bad, or experiences, good or bad, of co-production in your own research, in research where you have been a member of the team, or within your departments, then please submit it, because they are looking for a huge variety of research. And I think, forgive me for distilling it down to something so simple, what they're aiming to do is take this body of evidence to people like UKRI, and potentially even the government, and say, this is what is needed for co-production to happen in research across the country. And things like the seed funding that we were talking about needs to happen. And so this is the body of evidence from the higher education institution sector. Things need to change. So if you want your work included, if you want your voice heard, I urge you to have a closer look at the Co-Production Futures Inquiry. Any questions then for Nicola and or Ben?
Great stuff, let's go.
Over there. Oh, sorry, you. In the lovely...
Just look at me.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was very interested when you said about this new hub, account hub in April. I was not aware of this. I'm looking to do my dissertation in mental health, but more exploring the historical part here in New York about the Liberty and the Quakers, and it was like maybe I think what you are doing might be like a thing that I would like to be involved in, and if you could explain more what you are doing with them and how you work with the neurodivergent community there.
In terms of how to design a hub around the neurodivergent community. Yeah, so I go to a lot of kind of neurodivergent, there's like a warm welcome on a Friday, which I'm regularly attending. We also have somebody who is going to be on the interview panel for everyone who's having a job at the new mental health hub in Acomb, who is from the neurodivergent community, as well as other people as well. So it's a case of building that feedback in. So when we did a look at the building, so it's going to be at Acomb Garth, in Acomb is where the hub's going to be, but they are going to have a completely separate entrance. And I had people within the neurodivergent community come with me, and we walked around with the kind of builders and the estates planning team and said, that needs changing, those lights are too bright, that's too, we need to change that colour. And we were really like kind of just, I felt a bit sorry for him after an hour with him. We really hounded him. But it's about just every kind of thing that we do, everything where we think, we need to make a decision on something. It's like, right, let's just put the brakes on. Let's bring the community into that. And I kind of have it's quite an informal thing. I call it like I don't want to call it a network, so it's not great, but like a community champions, where we've just got loads of lovely people who just want to give up their time, and they're all from different backgrounds, diverse, and it's just amazing. So and I just like put the feelers out with them and say, look, does anyone want to get involved in this? We're just looking at the websites for it, so I'm just putting a co-production team together to design the websites and what do we need to do to kind of capture everybody. So if you want to be involved in any way, you want to kind of come and find me afterwards, get my details. I'm more than happy to listen to anyone, or if anyone wants to meet with me, more than happy to, and kind of tell you more about those hubs and stuff and what's going to be happening.
If it's helpful, I can add. So we've been doing a piece of work with NHS England about ear checks for young people who are autistic or have a learning disability, or both. And what we found in doing that work was we worked with the schools to work with the young people rather than us, because it wasn't really our space or place. And so we kind of said, look, here's some ideas, but you do it and then come back to us, because it felt inappropriate to go into the schools and do that. And so I guess that's another way of exploring doing something, but both ways work, right, depending on your audience or who you're trying to work with.
We have a similar example, and I'm looking at Lucy and Philip here, closer to home, where the work they're doing in the combat research project is working closely with schools in York College. And you're using the schools as that sort of intermediary, aren't you, to be able to reach children and young people? Feel free to advertise your project slightly more succinctly than I did.
Does Emily and Kelly as well have?
Sorry, Emily and Kelly.
We're out of course. Yeah, we are. I suppose it's a lot to do with the fact that we are. So as Emily mentioned before, we have developed an intervention which is for the for young people with mild to moderate low mood and depression in the community, and we've been delivering that for a couple of years, but now we're trying to sort of develop it further into certain groups. So at the minute, myself and Philip are heavily involved in a piece of work looking to develop our research specifically for young males, so looking at boys aged 13 to 17. So we've already, via Emily and Kelly, delivered our main intervention, and now we're going back to those sort of subsets of those groups and saying, can you now give us your feedback on how we can take that further? So very similar to what you were just talking about, Nicola. Don't know if you've got anything to add?
No, that's absolutely not. Just that we were kind of finding out the respect of that group of people, that we spoke to a group of professionals who said, this intervention, let's deliver this in a PSHE class or in a structured way, and then the young people say, absolutely not, and that would be too self-conscious, or people would take it seriously. We want to do this in our own time outside the school. So school could definitely act as a sort of gateway to kind of get, but it might be off school. But
it's definitely a gateway. But I think we've definitely then seen those two different opinions, and it is ensuring, because we went into one workshop with professionals who said, like Philip says, do it like this, and we were like, yes, brilliant, this is what we're planning. And then we spoke to young people, and they were like, absolutely no way, like we will never touch that in a year. And it was like right back to the drawing board. But it's so important that it's those young people that are the ones that take that work forward, and that's obviously like the theme of today. Not necessarily, obviously we need professionals on board, but it's about us saying, well, no, do you know what you've just said is actually a load of rubbish. Because these young boys say so, you know. So,
thank you. Thanks so much. Another question about the Acomb Hub, actually. Being an Acomb resident, I'm really interested as well. But it kind of links back to what Laura was saying about, we're talking about mental health so much these days, and it comes to mean many different things and many different flavours of lived experience. I'm curious how you have gone about naming the hub, going back to whether that's going to convey a certain idea of what it's about to different people, but also if it's going to be 24/7 open to all, how are you navigating those, or grappling with, you're going to have people they're in crisis, in the kind of classic sense. You're going to have people in financial distress that might be wanting to go and talk, I can imagine it being an amazing space where you might have welfare advice, you might have childcare advice, you might have employment support, but if you're doing that entire range from stress, distress, overwhelm through to crisis, just interested in the conversations you've had about how you're going to make this work. As a community.
There've been conversations. It's been super challenging, really has. We're not quite there yet still in terms of how it's fully going to work. NHS England said, here, you've got the money, we need it open within sort of 6 months to a year, and we went, right, okay, great. So we did one exercise where, within the co-production sessions, where we gave 3 different teams, 3 different groups, 3 different scenarios within the hub, and like a nighttime and a daytime, and we kind of got them saying, right, okay, this is where we've got loads of staff members, it's all rosy, we've got loads of staff members, so if 6 different things happen, then we have the ability to be able to handle loads of those things and keep everybody safe and things like that. Then we had like a sort of normal staffing, and then we had like a really limited amount of staffing, and we got people talking about what that might look like if we have that many people coming into the hub. So we've got to be completely aware that there are going to be times where we may have to say, look, okay, the hub tonight is, if we have like an online presence, the hub tonight is going to be, because we've got a few different people in, we might have to say, just ring ahead and just let us know that you want to come down, and we can then manage that and things like that. Again, it wouldn't be that kind of closed door aspect, but it'd just be a case of, look, we've got a few people in, and being honest and open about that and saying, look, can you come down in an hour or whatever, or pop down and we'll get you a cup of tea, but we might not get you seen for an hour or 2 and things like that. So that evening offering is something that's still kind of going on. I'm having lots of conversations about what that is going to look like. There are going to be no beds there. It's just going to be a comfortable space for people who are kind of, in maybe distress in the evening, or haven't, potentially have had to leave their home or whatever. Now, what's interesting is that it was with the other pilot sites across the country. So we've got there's Lewisham, Sheffield, Birmingham, and I've forgotten the other 2. But there's some people are doing beds, there's others aren't. So it's a case of everyone's designing it for their community. And when I've been working with the people in Aiken, people have just said, it wasn't so much beds that they wanted, just somewhere where they could go and get a cup of tea and have a chat with someone, and just that de-escalation. And we're not going to be able to do everything just quickly. We're not going to be able to do everything there and then, and being honest about that, saying, look, we can't sort everything out at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, but what we can do is we can hold your hand and take you, walk alongside you. In the morning, we can get you to the right service that you might need. And it's not a case of just saying, one thing that really came out of it was, not a case of just saying, here's the number for that service, there you go. It's taking them there, actually physically, if that's what they need, or however they want to get to that service, we will go with them. But then that creates, we need more conversations between services to say, we're struggling and things like that. So they're just ongoing conversations that we're having. So I've not answered your question really, but I have sort of, hopefully. Thank you.
There's an interesting point there about the name.
Oh, the name of the hub.
As well.
That's open to discussion, Yeah, there's no, that's being co-designed.
Okay.
That's going to be an ongoing process, I think, because it won't be, at the minute, it's just called the hub.
That works.
Yeah, we don't want to call it the mental health hub.
No.
So, but there are other pilot sites which are just calling it completely different, like Daffodil or something like that, which I thought, okay, whatever. So it's an ongoing thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just interested because you said in your presentation about there was a section that was in empowerment and how some people disagree with using that term, using that imagery, and you said when you were talking about designing the hub and people coming in and describing their needs and access requirements, and considering what previous speakers said about treating communities as rather than homogenous as made of different people, how you, when you're kind of creating these spaces or designing them, how you deal with situations in which some people's needs or some people's access needs conflict with other people's, or their lived experiences, or how they interact with different services conflict with each other, how you kind of balance that, how you resolve that.
It happens a fair bit. Yeah, it's really common, and that's the flexibility bit, I think. And I had a slide that I didn't get to do because we spoke too much, but that just said about something along the lines of make sure to slow down the treadmill, because what we see a lot in these spaces is the funder says we have to do it in 6 months, or and it's a constant push because of this like thing on your shoulder, which is like you must have it done by this time, which we can't always get away from, right? But we try to build in that flexibility in advance, and we've got more time to work through things, and then try to come into a space and spend time developing our kind of ways of working that don't necessarily 100% work for everybody, but there's something where we can compromise and we can do it together. And if not, then it's about those multiple methods for us, So if somebody is struggling and they don't feel able to join a meeting, giving them that opportunity to feed in outside of it, and respecting that the equity within a space, people will be able to communicate less or more information depending on their situation at that time or throughout the entire project. And it does take a lot of building trust and relationships to do that, because you get situations where people say, oh, well, so-and-so is not doing anything. They've not inputted anything. I've not seen them. Their bum's not on the seat. And it's kind of like their ability to be in that space is not happening. So they have fed in whatever way works for them. And if that means they've fed in 2 lines and that's been monumental for them, we have to create a space where we can respect that. But it's not easy. And it does take time. So I don't think I've got the ultimate answer. But
No, I haven't either. That's exactly the same. Yeah, there is something around that uncomfortability and listening to each other's point of view and just being open and honest and transparent about if you've got someone in who's, we had somebody who was just turned 19 and they were saying, well, hub, a mental health hub, like the only reason why I'd come is like if you had like a pool table or something like that, and we've got a 65-year-old in there who's saying, what would you want a pool table for? And that's a really simple example, but getting them two to chat together about why they want 2 different things, and can you come to some sort of solution on that, and seeing each other's points of view, and when you sit with that uncomfortability, it can be really wonderful when you overcome that and you see people then working together. Yeah. But there are some really challenging conversations before that happens. So that can be really difficult.
Yeah, and if anybody tells you co-production is easy, they're not doing doing co-production because it's hard. Yeah. It really is, but it's so rewarding as well.
Yeah.
So, Chair's, sorry, go for it, and then I'll do Chair's prerogative.
I was just wondering, thinking of clashing requirements, and people maybe feeling judged or judging other people. Like, how do you go about mitigating that or setting up a very clearly non-judgmental environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you go for it.
We spend a lot of time initially at the start of a piece of work trying to get to know each other and understand the perspective we come from, how we learn, how we communicate, how we interact with others. And we try to build a space whereby, one, we all feel safe, whatever that means to individuals, but also that we can bring our kind of authentic self and we can behave in a way, but again, that relies on us taking that time to build that relationship. You can't go from, right, we've got some funding, 0 to 100 and it'll be fine. I've seen it so many times when that happens where you face all the cracks quickly appear, right? And so I would so much advocate for taking that time to get to know each other and understand each other's kind of point of view. The space where I've seen it be really kind of difficult is around racism, right? So if you say co-production is truly equitable, does that mean a racist person can be part of the space? Or what if they are? How do we deal with that? And so we're doing a lot of work at the moment around kind of anti-racism and what that means in co-production, because we don't advocate racism at all, no, absolutely not, but what do we do if a person lacks understanding or is racist because they just want to be racist? Is there support we can provide outside of the space to help them? Are they up for doing that and learning and developing so that maybe in the future they can come back into the space? But that has to rely on the whole group being happy with that as well. So it's not me going, you're out, you're never coming back. It's up to the group what we want to do, and we try and work through that together, but it's very tricky.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, I'd say the one thing that we've just done in the kind of 4 sessions we've done around the mental health hub was, in that first session we all kind of got to know each other. We got everyone to design like creative name badges, and then ask everybody about why they'd put certain things on their name badge and stuff like that, and then like we kind of got rid of lanyards and all those kind of things, because there's obviously just so many different people with so many different hats in there as well, because even though I wear this and I've got this job title, I'm still loads of other things as well, and it was about kind of making everyone aware that we're all human, and that's the bottom line of it all, and we kind of created that little space, and we got them to co-design what values they wanted to live by within those sessions that we did. That worked really well. And what I will say is, and I'll completely be honest, we had somebody who we'd invited to those sessions from an organisation, primary organisation. They didn't come to the first two, and then they turned up randomly to the third one, and it disrupted massively the relationship that we'd created, because they weren't aware of what we'd done. They didn't know anybody, and they started asking questions that then disrupted it. And I had to take them aside and be like, look, I'm happy to do this afterwards, but right now, and it was really evident that they, had come in and everyone was like, whoa, what's going on here? So yeah, I think if you can, and when you're doing kind of successive co-production sessions, be wary about bringing new people into them. I find it's one thing that I've learned now. Or speak to them
in advance.
In prior. So that was one thing that I think it was a good thing to share, for sure.
Can I just chip in on that point? Because we have it with the Gypsy and traveller communities that the commitment can be difficult for people.
Yeah.
But we've talked about effectively like pre-briefings.
Yeah.
If you want to come in, we'll give you the full one on what we've got to before you come into a group discussion session, or you can do some one-to-one involvement, and I'll feed your stuff in whichever way around you do it. But for exactly that reason, because otherwise people are running to catch up. Yeah. And it throws everything off kilter.
Yeah.
Any last questions? I'm aware I'm standing between you and lunch.
Can I quickly say, thanks so much, because that we are ending on a positive note. We started with all the loopholes and the difficulties. I was just wondering, in many ways, this is also asking a question backwards to say, to what extent is who we invite into the room representative of what our ideal of inclusivity is? Because who is in the room and the problems you then have to deal with is already predefined by who's been invited, who actually is. So what are our blind spots about exclusions and communities within the community? I was thinking, how many of these spaces are actually maybe non-white or from very deprived areas, and then there's an inverse care law that we need to be very clear.
Yeah, it's a really good point. It's so hard when you've only got 20 spaces in a room to think, have we captured every single person across York with this? And no, we haven't. I think it's been open and honest about that, and trying to get as many people in from with as many different backgrounds as possible. But yeah, I absolutely, I think it's a really good point, and not one I have really an answer to be honest, other than just trying your best to kind of find every community and going in and being open and honest and talking to them and seeing if they want to be involved. If they don't, can we feed back in another way, as we've already kind of talked about. But yeah,
I think it's a constant. You've got to constantly be mindful of it and learning and reflecting and trying to do better. And the number of times I've told funders who've asked the question, show us or tell us how you're going to be truly representative of every community. And I literally sit there and go, I'm sorry, it's not possible. Yeah. If you think about intersectionality, and we are never ever going to achieve that, but we can try our best, and we will be really active in going out and trying to understand the different communities in York or wherever we're working to do that. But it will be constantly evolving, and we'll put these things in place to help when we bring new people in, or I think you have to have it at the top of the list of agenda. Hence our work around anti-racism, because we recognise that co-production can be racist as well as every other part of society, and the same in other areas of discrimination as well. You've got to be really mindful, and it's got to be top of the list of things, I think. Thank you very much.
So much. So lunch should be waiting for us outside, but just before then we'll just flag two quick things, if that's all right, which we'll follow up with on email as well.
The first is we've got a little bit of funding. So I know Ben was talking about the challenges of sort of 30 grand of funding. It's a lot less than that, sadly, what we've got. But trying, hopefully enough to give people a little bit of seed funding if they've got ideas for conversations they want to have. And we were touching a bit about the cost of people's involvement, but also the cost of organisation involvement as well. So we'll send a bit of information about this by email as well. But we've got kind of up to about £500-ish per application, depending on how many we're able to support. Ideally to be spent by May this year. We'll send round some information about that, and it's not an overly long application form, but if people have had ideas sparked and they want to get some initial seed work done, we should be hopefully able to support quite a few projects off the back of that if we can. So we'll send that. We'll also send around, which is compulsory for this kind of thing, an event feedback form. We'll leave the QR just up on the screen as well, so we'll pull that in. Other than that, just a huge set of thanks for all of our speakers, all of you for coming, all of that as well. And just say huge thanks for Carissa, Anna and Sylvia as well, has done loads of the organisational heavy lifting. Yes, and lunch should be outside, just where the tea and coffee was. Thanks so much.
Yeah.